this 10 talk about project-based learning in the ESL classroom. My name is Phil Morris, and I'm an ESL teacher in beautiful, sunny Seattle, Washington. Today I want to specifically talk about podcasting as project-based learning in the ESL classroom. So if you're joining me today to learn about either podcasting or project-based learning, I'm very happy to have you. First, let's answer a question. What is project-based learning? Why would you choose podcasting? And how does that relate to language learning? Those are all good questions. Let's start with podcasting. What is a podcast? A podcast is really just like a radio broadcast that's hosted on the internet. And believe it or not, it's very simple for you to create a podcast. You really just need two things. You need a smartphone, which probably most of you have, and a laptop or a desktop computer. If you have those two things alone, you can create a very good podcast. How do you do it? Well, you can record what you want to say in your podcast directly into either your smartphone or the microphone on your laptop. It is helpful if you have earbuds with the microphone attached, but it's not necessary. You're going to script something based on a theme that you decide about in advance, and once that recording is done, you can either upload it directly to the internet in its final form, or you can edit it before uploading it. I'm going to suggest that you edit it, and if that makes you a little nervous, don't be nervous, because learning to edit audio files on a desktop or a laptop computer is actually pretty easy. So there are some free programs, one for PC called Audacity, and one for Mac called GarageBand. And both of those programs will allow you to clean up noises in the background or ums and ahs and hesitations, things like that in your audio. They'll also allow you to add music at the beginning and the end of your podcast, or really anywhere else you would want to put it. You can really learn to edit your podcast and get rid of those ums and ahs and add music within 30 minutes. There are a host of YouTube tutorials and web pages dedicated to teaching you how to use those programs, and they're just not that complicated. Now, you know how to podcast, the basics at least. Because podcasting is a little more expansive than that, I have recorded a bonus episode, as a podcaster might say, and uploaded it to archives.org. So if you go to archives.org, you'll be able to find a 10-talk podcasting podcast as a complement to this 10-talk that we're having now. This way you'll be able to get a little more information about podcasting if you're interested. I'll post that web link in the credits at the end of this video. Now, let's talk about project-based learning. Project-based learning is maybe a little different or a little more exotic than what's typically done in an ESL classroom. Many of us are familiar with the SIOP model or the Sheltered Instructional Protocol. You help scaffold students through various stages of learning. First they start out with a lot of guidance, and then they receive less guidance, and then they're sort of led on their own to practice the skill, and then of course there's some sort of assessment to understand how they're doing. Well, project-based learning is different for a couple of important reasons. One, you don't instruct and then test the skill in project-based learning. You really investigate and exercise different skills and do different things while using language. So the order that project-based learning takes is a little bit different, and it's worth understanding before you begin. Project-based learning, just like many of your lessons in the ESL classroom, is essentially based on a lesson plan. And it's really critical in project-based learning that you have established a long-term timeline for your podcast or any other project that you take on. You'll want to understand what the beginning, the middle, and the end looks like. You'll want to understand where the pain points are in the process. What vocabulary, grammar, or other language-based issues tend to cause trouble for students. You might need to plan some extra time in there. Since you've gone through the trouble of learning how to podcast and learning about project-based learning, you're also going to want to estimate the pain points that might be related to technology use. So some students will be very proficient at using computers and cell phones and moving back and forth with audio files, and other students will need more time. Think about that. Then you also want to consider how your language learning goals match up with your curriculum, your project. Where are you going to teach about certain vocabulary terms or phrasing? Think about that for a minute. There's an opportunity with project-based learning to talk about some things that you might not talk about in the everyday ESL classroom. So technical terms related to audio files and editing and uploading, they can help students with everyday projects that they might take on using their computers and other technology at home. You also want to know what the students are investigating, or what are they doing, what's their theme. Well, you've probably decided early on in your project-based learning journey that students really need something they can be interested in and act independently on. And this means that something like recording personal narratives or designing some kind of audio-based fan fiction, giving a mock speech or some sort of mock TV news broadcast are all things that could be considered for a podcast where students would be highly invested and interested in, and you as a teacher would understand where they might go and offer them guidance on that. It's really important that students in project-based learning investigate and drive their own learning. Now, having said that, we know that project-based learning is part of a constructivist push where responsibility for learning is pushed a little bit more towards the student. And oftentimes in those discussions, teachers are talked about as facilitators of learning. So in the case of project-based learning, if students are creating something, they're in the driver's seat. They've got voice and choice, and they're investigating a project that they're passionate about. When the teacher becomes a facilitator, that may sound very appealing, but there is a danger to it. So I caution you, don't think of yourself as a facilitator, because then as a teacher you might become a little bit passive. Think of yourself as an activator. So a facilitator and an activator, I think, could be the same thing, or pretty close. You really want to make sure that you keep your students on target, keep them inspired, and just like a flipped classroom, you as the teacher have an opportunity to see in real time what they're digesting and how they're creating things, and that's very important. So, project-based learning, let's go back to the timeline. So, you've planned out what you'd like to do, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you've anticipated some pain points, and you've got some things to keep in mind that will help you find success in the classroom. I would highly recommend to encourage student interest and excitement about these projects. Think about an entry event. An entry event could be a speaker coming in, an expert in a field. They can come talk to your class and get them excited about whatever it is they're starting on. You could watch a video or a movie that the students may be interested in. Think of something that's going to fit your class well, but is maybe a little bit out of the ordinary and really generates interest. Next, I want you to think about how you'll finish your podcast. So your project-based learning event is over, and how do you celebrate that? What could you do to celebrate that? It could be a presentation of whatever the students present to other students in other classrooms or to their family. So clearly, there's a lot to think about with project-based learning. And if you consult some good resources like the Buck Institute and PBL Works, you can make it happen in your classroom as well. Remember, collaborate with other teachers, plan in advance, understand your technology, which I hope I've helped you with at least a little bit today. And you can then introduce podcasting as project-based learning in your ESL classroom. So I will post some links to resources in the credits of this video, and then again I'll expand on some of these topics, especially the podcasting part of it, in the companion podcast which I've posted to archives.org. I want to take a moment to say thank you to everybody that watches this video, and I invite you to get in touch with me to collaborate on any projects you might be interested in. I'm always eager to connect with other ESL teachers and try to make some interesting things happen. I want to send a thank you to the Teach English Now staff. I was part of the Teach English Now TESOL certification, and I'm very happy to be part of this 2019 virtual conference. Thank you, everyone.